Gogol's first home is a fully furnished apartment 10 minutes by foot to Harvard, 20 to MIT. The apartment is on the first floor of a 3-story house covered with salmon-colored shingles, surrounded by waist-high chain-link fence. The grey roof, the grey cigarette ashes, matches the pavement of the sidewalk and the street. A row of cars parked at meters perpetually lines one side of the curb. At the corner of the block there is a small used bookstore which one enters by going down 3 steps from the sidewalk and across from it, in a musty shop that sells the newspaper and cigarettes and eggs, and where, to Ashima's mild disgust, a furry black cat is permitted to sit, as it pleases, on the shelves. Other than these small businesses, there are more shingled houses, the same shape and size, and in the same state of mild decrepitude, painted mint or lilac or powder blue. This is the house Ashok had brought Ashima to 18 months ago, late one February night, upon her arrival at Logan Airport. In the dark, through the windows of the taxi, wide awake from jet lag, she could barely make anything out, apart from heaps of broken snow, glowing like shattered, bluish-white bricks on the ground. It wasn't morning. Stepping briefly outside, It wasn't until morning, stepping briefly outside wearing a pair of Ashok's socks under her thin-soled slippers, the frigid New England chill piercing her inner ears and jaw, that she had first her real glimpse of America. Leafless trees with ice-covered branches, dog urine and excrement embedded in the snowbanks. Not a soul on the street. The apartment consists of 3 rooms, all in a row, without a corridor. There is a living room at the front with a 3-sided window overlooking the street, a pass-through bedroom in the middle, a kitchen at the back. It is not at all what she had expected. Not at all like the houses in Gone with the Wind or The 7-Year Itch, movies she had seen with her brother and cousins at the lighthouse and the metro. The apartment is drafty during winter and in summer intolerably hot. The thick glass window panes are covered by dreary, dark brown curtains. There are even roaches in the bathroom, emerging at night from the cracks in the tiles. But she has complained of none of this. She has kept her disappointment to herself, not wanting to offend Ashok or worry her parents. Instead, she writes, in her letters home, of the powerful cooking gas that flares up at any time of day or night from 4 burners on the stove, and the hot tap water fierce enough to scald her skin, and the cold water safe enough to drink. The top 2 floors of the house are occupied by their landlords, the Montgomerys, a Harvard sociology professor and his wife. The Montgomerys have 2 children, both girls, Amber and Clover, aged 7 and 9, whose waist-length hair is never braided, and who play on warm days for hours on a tire swing rigged to the only tree in the backyard. The professor, who has told Ashima and Ashok to call him Alan, not Professor Montgomery, as they had at first addressed him, has a wiry rust-colored beard that makes him look much older than he actually is. They see him walking to the Harvard yard in a pair of threadbare trousers, a fringed suede jacket, and rubber flip-flops. Rickshaw drivers dress better than professors here. Ashok, who still attends meetings with his advisor in a jacket and tie, thinks frequently to himself. The Montgomerys have a dull green Volkswagen van covered with stickers. Question authority. Give a damn. Ban the bra. Peace. They have a washing machine in the basement which Ashok and Ashima are permitted to share. A television in their living room which Ashok and Ashima can hear clearly through the ceiling. It had been through the ceiling one night in April, when Ashok and Ashima were eating their dinner, that they had heard about the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and just recently of Senator Robert Kennedy. Sometimes Ashima and Alan's wife, Judy, stand side by side in the yard clipping clothes to the line. Judy always wears blue jeans, torn up into shorts once summer comes, and a necklace of small seashells around her throat, a red cotton scarf over her stringy yellow hair, the same texture and shade as her daughter's, is always tied at the back of her neck. She works for a women's health collective in Somerville a few days a week. When she learned of Ashima's pregnancy, she approved of Ashima's decision to breastfeed, but had been disappointed to learn that Ashima was going to put herself in the hands of the medical establishment for her child's delivery. Judy's daughters were both born at home, with the help of midwives at the collective. Some nights, Judy and Alan go out, leaving Amber and Clover unsupervised at home. Only once, when Clover had a cold, did they ask Ashima if she could check in on them. Ashima remembers their apartment with abiding horror. Just beyond the ceiling, yet so different from their own, piles everywhere, piles of books and papers, piles of dirty plates on the kitchen counter, ashtrays the size of serving platters heaped with crushed out cigarettes. The girls slept together on a bed piled with clothes. Sitting momentarily on the edge of Alan and Judy's mattress, she had cried out, falling clumsily backward, startled to discover that it was filled with water. Instead of cereal and tea bags, there were whiskey and wine bottles on top of the refrigerator, most of them nearly empty. Just standing there had made Ashima feel drunk. They arrive home from the hospital courtesy of Dr. Gupta, who owns a car, and sit in the sweltering living room in front of their only box fan, suddenly a family. Instead of a couch, they have 6 chairs, all of them three-legged, with oval wooden backs and black triangular cushions. To her surprise, finding herself once again in the gloomy 3-room apartment, Ashima misses the hustle-bustle of the hospital, and Patty, and the jello and ice cream brought at regular intervals to her side. As she walks slowly through the rooms, it irks her that there are dirty dishes stacked in the kitchen, that the bed has not been made. Until now, Ashima has accepted that there is no one to sweep the floor, or do the dishes, or wash clothes, or shop for groceries or prepare a meal on the days she is tired or homesick or cross. She has accepted that the very lack of such amenities is the American way. But now, with a baby crying in her arms, her breasts swollen with milk, her body coated with sweat, her groin still so sore she can scarcely sit, it is all suddenly unbearable. "I can't do this," she tells Ashok, when he brings her a cup of tea. The only thing he can think to do for her, the last thing she feels like drinking. "In a few days you'll get the hang of it," he says, hoping to encourage her, unsure of what else to do. He sets the cup beside her on the flaking windowsill. "I think he's falling asleep again," he adds, looking at Gogol, whose cheeks are working methodically at his wife's breast. "I won't," she insists, thickly, looking neither at the baby nor at him. She pulls back a bit of the curtain and lets it fall. "Not here, not like this. What are you saying, Ashima?" "I'm saying, hurry up and finish your degree." And then, impulsively, admitting it for the first time, "I'm saying I don't want to raise Gogol alone in this country. It's not right. I want to go back." He looks at Ashima, her face leaner, the features sharper than they had been at their wedding, aware that her life in Cambridge as his wife has already taken a toll. On more than one occasion he has come home from university to find her morose in bed, rereading her parents' letters. Early mornings, when he senses that she is quietly crying, he puts an arm around her but can think of nothing to say, feeling that it is his fault for marrying her, for bringing her here. He remembers suddenly about Ghosh, his companion on the train, who has returned from England for his wife's sake. "It is my greatest regret coming back," Ghosh had confessed to Ashok mere hours before he was killed. A soft knock on the door interrupts them. Alan and Judy, Amber and Clover, all there to see the baby. Judy holds a dish covered with checkered cloth in her hands, says she has made a broccoli quiche. Alan sets down a garbage bag full of Amber and Clover's old baby clothes, uncorks a bottle of cold champagne. The foaming liquid splashes onto the floor, is poured into mugs. They raise their mugs to Gogol, Ashima, and Ashok, only pretending to take sips. Amber and Clover flank Ashima at either side, both delighted when Gogol wraps a hand around each of their fingers. Judy scoops the baby out of Ashima's lap. "Hello, handsome," she says. She coos. "Oh, Alan," she says, "let's have another one of these." Alan offers to bring up the girl's crib from the basement, and together he and Ashok assemble it in the space next to Ashima and Ashok's bed. Ashok goes out to the corner store, and a box of disposable diapers replaces the framed black and white pictures of Ashima's family on the dressing table. 20 minutes at 3:50 for the quiche, Judy says to Ashima. "Holler if you need anything." Alan adds before they disappear. 3 days later, Ashok is back at MIT. Alan is back at Harvard. Amber and Clover are back at school. Judy is at work at the collective as usual. And Ashima on her own with Gogol, for the first time in the silent house, suffering from a sleep deprivation far worse than her first jet lag, sits by the three-sided window in the living room on one of the triangular chairs and cries the whole day. She cries as she feeds him, and as she pats him to sleep, and as he cries between sleeping and feeding. She cries after the mailman's visit because there are no letters from Calcutta. She cries when Ashok does not answer her calls at his department. One day she cries when she goes to the kitchen to make dinner and discovers that they have run out of rice. She goes upstairs and knocks on Alan and Judy's door. "Help yourself," Judy says, but the rice in Judy's canister is brown. To be polite, Ashima takes a cup, but downstairs she throws it away. She calls Ashok at his department to ask him to pick up the rice on his way home. This time, when there is no answer, she gets up, washes her face, and combs her hair. She changes and dresses Gogol and puts him into the navy blue white-wheeled pram inherited from Alan and Judy. For the first time, she pushes him through the balmy streets of Cambridge to Purity Supreme to buy a bag of white long-grain rice. The errand takes longer than usual, for now she is repeatedly stopped on the street and in the aisles of the supermarket by perfect strangers, all Americans, suddenly taking note of her, smiling, congratulating her for what she has done. They look curiously, appreciatively into the pram. "How old?" they ask. "Boy or girl? What's his name?" She begins to pride herself on doing it alone, in devising a routine. Like Ashok, busy with his teaching and research and dissertation 7 days a week, she too now has something to occupy her fully, to demand her utmost devotion, her last ounce of strength. Before Gogol's birth, her days had followed no visible pattern. She would spend hours in the apartment napping, sulking, rereading her same 5 Bengali novels on the bed. But now the days that had once dragged rush all too quickly toward evening. Those same hours are consumed with Gogol, pacing the 3 rooms of the apartment with him in her arms. Now she wakes at 6, pulling Gogol out of the crib for his first feeding. And then for half an hour she and Ashok lie with the baby in bed between them, admiring the tiny person they have produced. Between 11 and 1, while Gogol sleeps, she gets dinner out of the way, a habit she will maintain for decades to come. Every afternoon she takes him out, wandering up and down the streets, to pick up this or that, or to sit in Harvard Yard, sometimes meeting up with Ashok on a bench on the MIT campus, bringing him some homemade samosas and a fresh thermos of tea. At times, staring at the baby, she sees pieces of her family in his face, her mother's glossy eyes, her father's slim lips, her brother's lopsided smile. She discovers a yarn store and begins to knit for coming winter, making Gogol sweaters, blankets, mittens, and caps. Every few days she gives Gogol a bath in the porcelain sink in the kitchen. Every week she carefully clips the nails of his 10 fingers and toes. When she takes him in his pram for his immunizations at the pediatrician's, she stands outside the room and plucks up her ears. One day Ashok arrives home with an Instamatic camera to take pictures of the baby, and when Gogol is napping, she pastes the square, white-bordered prints behind plastic sheets in an album, captions written on pieces of masking tape. To put him to sleep, she sings him the Bengali songs her mother had sung to her. She drinks in the sweet, milky fragrance of his skin, the buttery scent of his breath. One day she lifts him high over her head, smiling at him with her mouth open, and a quick stream of undigested milk from his last feeding rises from his throat and pours into her own. For the rest of her life she will recall the shock of that warm, sour liquid, a taste that leaves her unable to swallow another thing for the rest of the day. Letters arrive from her parents, from her husband's parents, from aunts and uncles, and cousins and friends, from everyone it seems, but Ashima's grandmother. The letters are filled with every possible blessing and good wish, composed in an alphabet they have seen all around them for most of their lives, on billboards and newspapers and awnings, but which they see now only in these precious pale blue missives. Sometimes 2 letters arrive in a single week. One week there are 3. As always, Ashima keeps her ear trained between the hours of 12 and 2 for the sound of the postman's footsteps on the porch, followed by the soft click of the mail slot in the door. The margins of her parents' letters, always a block of her mother's hasty penmanship, followed by her father's flourishing, elegant hand, are frequently decorated with drawings of animals done by Ashima's father, and Ashima tapes these on the wall over Gogol's crib. "We are dying to see him," her mother writes. "These are the most crucial months. Every hour there is a change. Remember it." Ashima writes back with careful descriptions of her son, reporting the circumstances of his first smile, the day he first rolls over, his first squeal of delight. She writes that they are saving money for a trip home the following December after Gogol turns 1. She does not mention the pediatrician's concern about tropical diseases. A trip to India will require a whole new set of immunizations, he has warned. In November, Gogol develops a mild ear infection. When Ashima and Ashok see their son's pet name typed on the label of a prescription for antibiotics, when they see it at the top of his immunization record, it doesn't look right. Pet names aren't meant to be made public in this way. But there is still no letter from Ashima's grandmother. They are forced to conclude that it is lost in the mail. Ashima decides to write to her grandmother, explaining the situation, asking her to send a second letter with the names. The very next day a letter arrives in Cambridge, though it is from Ashima's father. No drawings from Gogol adorn the margins, no elephants or parrots or tigers. The letter is dated 3 weeks ago, and from it they learn that Ashima's grandmother has had a stroke, that her right side is permanently paralyzed, her mind dim. She can no longer chew, barely swallow, remembers and recognizes little of her 80-odd years. She is still with us, but to be honest, we have already lost her. Her father has written, "Prepare yourself, Ashima. Perhaps you may not see her again." It is their first piece of bad news from home. Ashok barely knows Ashima's grandmother, only vaguely recalls touching her feet at his wedding. But Ashima is inconsolable for days. She sits at home with Gogol as the leaves turn brown and drop from the trees, as the days begin to grow quickly, mercilessly dark, thinking of the last time she saw her grandmother, her Dida, a few days before flying to Boston. Ashima had gone to visit her. For the occasion, her grandmother had entered the kitchen over a decade's retirement to cook Ashima a light goat and potato stew. She had fed her sweets with her own hand, unlike her parents and her other relatives. Her grandmother had not admonished Ashima not to eat beef or wear skirts or cut off her hair or forget her family the moment she had landed in Boston. Her grandmother had not been fearful of such signs of betrayal. She was the only person to predict, rightly, that Ashima would never change. Before leaving, Ashima had stood, her head lowered, under her late grandfather's portrait, asking him to bless her journey. Then she bent down to touch the dust of her Dida's feet to her head. "Dida, I'm coming," Ashima had said, for this was the phrase Bengalis always used in place of goodbye. "Enjoy it," her grandmother had bellowed in her thundering voice, helping Ashima to straighten. With trembling hands, her grandmother had pressed her thumbs to tears streaming down Ashima's face, wiping them away. "Do what I will never do. It will all be for the best. Remember that. Now go." As the baby grows, so too does their circle of Bengali acquaintances. Through the Nandis, now expecting a child of their own, Ashok and Ashima meet the Mitras, and through the Mitras, the Banerjees. More than once, pushing Gogol in his stroller, Ashima has been approached on the streets of Cambridge by young Bengali bachelors, shyly inquiring after her origins. Like Ashok, the bachelors fly back to Kolkata one by one, returning with wives. Every weekend, it seems, there is a new home to go to, a new couple or young family to meet. They all come from Calcutta, and for this reason alone they are friends. Most of them live within walking distance of one another. In Cambridge, the husbands are teachers, researchers, doctors, engineers. The wives, homesick and bewildered, turn to Ashima for recipes and advice, and she tells them about the carp that's sold in Chinatown, that it's possible to make halwa from cream of wheat. The families drop by one another's homes on Sunday afternoons. They drink tea with sugar and evaporated milk, and eat shrimp cutlets fried in saucepans. They sit in circles on the floor singing songs by Nazrul and Tagore, passing a thick yellow cloth-bound book of lyrics amongst them, as Dilip Nandi plays the harmonium. They argue riotously over the films of Ritwik Ghatak versus those of Satyajit Ray, the CPIM versus the Congress Party, North Calcutta versus South. For hours they argue about the politics of America, a country in which none of them is eligible to vote. By February, when Gogol is 6 months old, Ashima and Ashok know enough people to entertain on a proper scale. The occasion, Gogol's Annaprasan, his rice ceremony. There is no baptism for Bengali babies, no ritualistic naming in the eyes of God. Instead, the first formal ceremony of their lives centers around the consumption of solid food. They ask Dilip Nandi to play the part of Ashima's brother, to hold the child and feed him rice, the Bengali staff of life. For the very first time, Gogol is dressed as an infant Bengali groom in a pale yellow pajama Punjabi from his grandmother in Kolkata. The fragrance of cumin seeds, sent in package along with the pajamas, lingers in the weave. A headpiece that Ashima cut out of paper, decorated with pieces of aluminum foil, is tied around Gogol's head with string. He wears a thin 14-carat gold chain around his neck. His tiny forehead has been decorated with considerable struggle, with sandalwood paste to form 6 miniature beech moons floating above his brows. His eyes have been darkened with a touch of coal. He fidgets in the lap of his honorary uncle, who sits on a bed cover on the floor, surrounded by guests in front and behind and beside him. The food is arranged in 10 separate bowls. Ashima regrets that the plate on which the rice is heaped is melamine, not silver or brass, or at the very least stainless steel. The final bowl contains payesh, a warm rice pudding Ashima will prepare for him to eat on each of his birthdays as a child, as an adult even, alongside a slice of bakery cake. He is photographed by his father and friends, frowning as he searches for his mother's face in the crowd. She is busy setting up the buffet. She wears a silvery sari, a wedding gift worn for the first time, the sleeves of her blouse reaching the crook of her elbow. His father wears a transparent white Punjabi top over bell-bottom trousers. Ashima sets out paper plates that have been tripled to hold the weight of the biryani, the carp in yogurt sauce, the dal, the 6 different vegetable dishes she had spent the past week preparing. The guests will eat standing or sitting cross-legged on the floor. They've invited Ellen and Judy from upstairs, who look as they always do, in jeans and thick sweaters because it's cold, leather sandals buckled over woolly socks. Judy eyes the buffet, bites into something that turns out to be a shrimp cutlet. "And I thought Indians were supposed to be vegetarian," she whispers to Alan. Gogol's feeding begins. It's all just a touch, a gesture. No one expects the boy to eat anything more than a grain of rice here, a drop of dal there. It is all meant to introduce him to a lifetime of consumption, a meal to inaugurate the tens of thousands of unremembered meals to come. A handful of women ululate as the proceedings begin. A conch shell is repeatedly tapped and passed around, but no one in the room is able to get it to emit a sound. Blades of grass and Pradeep's slim, steady flame are held to Gogol's head. The child is entranced, doesn't squirm or turn away, opens his mouth obediently for each and every course. He takes his paish 3 times. Ashima's eyes fill with tears as Gogol's mouth eagerly invites the spoon. She can't help wishing her own brother were here to feed him, her own parents to bless him with their hands on his head. And the grand finale, the moment they have all been waiting for, to predict his future path in life. Gogol is offered a plate holding a clump of cold Cambridge soil dug up from the backyard, a ballpoint pen, and a dollar bill. To see if he will be a landowner, scholar, or businessman. Most children will grab at one of them, sometimes all of them, but Gogol touches nothing. He shows no interest in the plate, instead turning away, briefly burying his face in his honorary uncle's shoulder. "Put the money in his hand," someone in the group calls out. "An American boy must be rich." "No," his father protests. "The pen, Gogol, take the pen." Gogol regards the plate doubtfully. Dozens of dark heads hover expectantly. The material of Punjabi pajama set begins to scratch his skin. "Go on, Gogol, take something," Dilip Nandi says, drawing the plate close. Gogol frowns and his lower lip trembles. Only then, forced at 6 months to confront his destiny, does he begin to cry. Another August. Gogol is 1. Grabbing, walking a little, repeating words in 2 languages, he calls his mother Ma, his father Baba. If a person in the room says Gogol, he turns his head and smiles. He sleeps through the night and between noon and 3 each day. He has 7 teeth and constantly attempts to put the tiniest scraps of paper and lint and whatever else he finds on the floor into his mouth. Ashok and Ashima are planning their first trip to Calcutta in December during Ashok's winter break. The upcoming journey inspires them to try to come up with a good name for Gogol so they can submit his passport application. They turn to their Bengali friends for suggestions. Long evenings are devoted to considering this name or that, but nothing appeals to them. By then they have given up on the letter from Ashima's grandmother. They have given up on her grandmother remembering the name. For Ashima's grandmother, they are told, cannot even remember Ashima. Still, there is time. The trip to Calcutta is 4 months away. Ashima regrets that they can't go earlier in time for Durga Puja, but it will be years before Ashok is eligible for a sabbatical, and 3 weeks in December is all they can manage. It is like going home a few months after your Christmas, Ashima explains to Judy one day over the clothesline. Judy replies that she and Alan are Buddhists. At breakneck speed, Ashima knits sweater vests for her father, her father-in-law, her brother, her 3 favorite uncles. They are all the same V-neck, pine green yarn, knit 5, purl 2 on number 2 needles. The exception is her father's, done in a double seed stitch with 2 thick cables and buttons down the front. He prefers cardigans to pullovers, and she remembers to put in pockets for the deck of cards he always carries with him to play patience at a moment's notice. In addition to the sweater, she buys him 3 sable-haired paintbrushes from Harvard Coop, sizes he has requested by mail. Though they are wildly expensive, more so than anything else she has ever bought in America, Ashok says nothing when he sees the bill. One day, Ashima goes shopping in downtown Boston, spending hours in the basement of Jordan Marsh as she pushes Gogol in his stroller, spending every last penny. She buys mismatched teaspoons, percale pillowcases, colored candles, soaps on ropes. In a drugstore she buys Timex watch for her father-in-law, BIC pens for her cousins, embroidery thread and thimbles for her mother and her aunts. On the train home she is exhilarated, exhausted, nervous with anticipation of the trip. The train is crowded, and at first she stands, struggling to hang on to all the bags and the stroller and the overhead strap, until a young girl asks if she'd like to sit down. Ashima thanks her, sinking gratefully into the seat, pushing the large bags protectively behind her legs. She is tempted to sleep as Gogol does. She leans her head against the window and closes her eyes, and thinks of home. She pictures the black iron bars in the windows of her parents' flat, and Gogol in his American baby clothes and diapers, playing beneath the ceiling fan on her parents' 4-poster bed. She pictures her father missing a tooth, lost after a recent fall. Her mother has written on the stairs. She tries to imagine how it will feel when her grandmother doesn't recognize her. When she opens her eyes, she sees that the train is standing still. The doors open at her stop. She leaps up, her heart racing. "Excuse me, please," she says, pushing the stroller and herself through the tightly packed bodies. "Ma'am," someone says as she struggles past. about to step onto the platform. "Your things!" The door of the subway clamps shut as she realizes her mistake, and the train rolls slowly away. She stands there watching until the rear car disappears into the tunnel, until she and Gogol are the only people remaining on the platform. She pushes the stroller back down Massachusetts Avenue, weeping freely, knowing that she can't possibly afford to go back and buy it all again. For the rest of the afternoon she is furious with herself, humiliated at the prospect of arriving in Kolkata empty-handed, apart from the sweaters and the paintbrushes. But when Ashok comes home, he calls the MBTA lost and found. The following day the bags are returned, not a teaspoon missing. Somehow, this small miracle causes Ashima to feel connected to Cambridge in a way she has not previously thought possible, affiliated with its exceptions as well as its rules. She has a story to tell at dinner parties. Friends listen amazed at her luck. "Only in this country," Mayanandi says. One night, not long after, they are fast asleep when the telephone rings. The sound rouses them instantly, their hearts hammering as if from the same frightening dream. Ashima knows even before Ashok answers that it's a call from India. A few months ago her family had asked in a letter for the phone number in Cambridge, and she had sent it reluctantly in her reply, aware that it would only be a way for bad news to reach her. As Ashok sits up and takes the receiver, answering in a very weakened voice, Ashima prepares herself. She pushes down the crib railing to comfort Gogol, who has begun stirring as a result of the telephone rings, and reviews the facts in her head. Her grandmother is in her 80s, bedridden, all but senile, unable to eat or talk. The last few months of her life, according to her parents' most recent letter, have been painful for her grandmother, for those who knew her. It was no way to live. She pictures her mother saying all this gently into the next door neighbor's phone, standing in the neighbor's sitting room. Ashima prepares herself for the news, to accept the fact that Gogol will never meet his great-grandmother and giver of his lost name. The room is unpleasantly cold. She picks up Gogol and gets back into bed, under the blanket. She presses the baby to her body for strength, puts him to her breast. She thinks of the cream-colored cardigan bought with her grandmother in mind, sitting in a shopping bag in the closet. She hears Ashok speaking, saying soberly but loudly enough so that she fears he will awake Alan and Judy upstairs. "Yes, all right, I see. Don't worry. Yes, I will." For a while he is silent, listening. "They want to talk to you," he says to Ashima, briefly putting a hand to her shoulder. In the dark, he hands her the phone. After a moment's hesitation, he gets out of bed. She takes the phone in order to hear the news for herself, to console her mother. She can't help but wonder who will console her the day her own mother dies. If that news will also come to her in this way in the middle of the night, wresting her from dreams. In spite of her dread, she feels a thrill. This will be the first time she has heard her mother's voice in nearly 3 years. the first time since her departure from Dum Airport, that she will be called Monu. Only it isn't her mother, but her brother, Rana, on the other end. His voice sounds small, threaded into a wire, barely recognizable, through the holes of the receiver. Ashima's first question is what time it is there. She has to repeat the question 3 times, shouting, in order to be heard. Rana tells her it's lunchtime. Are you still planning to visit in December? Yes. She feels her chest ache, moved after all this time to hear her brother call her Didi, his older sister, a term he alone in the world is entitled to use. At the same time, she hears water running in a Cambridge kitchen, her husband opening a cupboard for a glass. Of course we are coming, she says, unsettled, when she hears her echo saying it faintly, less convincingly, once again. How is Dida? Has anything else happened to her? Still alive, Rana says, but still the same. Ashima rests back on her pillow, limp with relief. She would see her grandmother after all, even if for one last time. She kisses Gogol on the top of his head, presses her cheek to his. Thank goodness. Put Ma on, she says, crossing her ankles. Let me talk to her. She's not at home now, Rana says, after a static-filled pause. And Baba? A patch of silence follows before his voice returns. Not here. Oh, she remembers the time difference. Her father must be at work already at the Desh offices. Her mother at the market, a burlap bag in hand, buying vegetables and fish. How is little Gogol? Rana asks her. Does he only speak English? She laughs. He doesn't speak much of anything at the moment. She begins to tell Rana that she is teaching Gogol to say Dida and Dadu and Mamu, to recognize his grandparents and his uncle from photographs. But another burst of static, longer silence this time, quiets her in mid-sentence. Rana, can you hear me? I can't hear you, Didi, Rana says, his voice growing fainter. Can't hear. Let's speak later. Yes, she says. Later. See you soon. Very soon. Write to me. She puts down the phone, invigorated by the sound of her brother's voice. An instant later she is confused and somewhat irritated. Why had he gone to the trouble of calling only to ask an obvious question? Why call while both her parents are out? Ashok returns from the kitchen, a glass of water in his hand. He sets down the water and switches on the small lamp by the side of the bed. I'm awake, Ashok says, though his voice is still small from fatigue. Me too. What about Gogol? Asleep again? She gets up and puts him back in the crib, drawing the blanket to his shoulders, then returns to bed, shivering. I don't understand it, she says, shaking her head at the rumpled sheet. Why did Rana go to the trouble of calling just now? It's so expensive. It doesn't make sense. She turns to look at Ashok. What did he say to you exactly? Ashok shakes his head from side to side, his profile lowered. He told you something you're not telling me. Tell me, what did he say? He continues to shake his head, and then he reaches across to her side of the bed and presses her hands so tightly that it is slightly painful. He presses her to the bed, lying on top of her, his face to one side, his body suddenly trembling. He holds her this way for so long that she begins to wonder if he is going to turn off the light and caress her. Instead, he tells her what Rana told him a few minutes ago, what Rana couldn't bear to tell his own sister over the telephone himself, that her father had died yesterday morning of a heart attack, playing patience on his bed. They leave for India 6 days later, 6 weeks before they had planned. Alan and Judy walking the next morning to Ashima's sobs, then hearing the news from Ashok, leave a vase filled with flowers by the door. In 6 days there is no time to think of a good name for Gogol. They get an express passport with Gogol Ganguly typed across the United States of America seal, Ashok signing on his son's behalf. The day before leaving, Ashima puts Gogol in his stroller, puts the sweater she had knit for her father and the paintbrushes in her shopping bag, and walks to Harvard Square to the subway station. "Excuse me," she asks a gentleman on the street. "I must get on the train." The man helps her carry down the stroller, and Ashima waits on the platform. When the train comes, she heads immediately back to Central Square. This time she is wide awake. There are only a half-dozen people in the car, their faces hidden behind the globe, or looking down at paperback books, or staring straight through her at nothing. As the train slows to a halt, she stands ready to disembark. She does not turn to look back at the shopping bag left purposefully beneath her seat. "Hey, the Indian lady forgot her stuff," she hears as the door shut. And as the train pulls away, she hears a fist pounding on glass, but she keeps walking, pushing Gogol along the platform. The following evening, they board a Pan Am flight to London, where after a 5-hour layover they will board a second flight to Calcutta via Tehran and Bombay. On the runway in Boston, her seatbelt buckled, Ashima looks at her watch and calculates the Indian time in her fingers. But this time no image of her family comes to mind. She refuses to picture what she shall see soon enough. Her mother's vermilion erased from her past, her brother's thick hair shaved from his head in mourning. The wheels begin to move, causing the enormous metal wings to flap gently out and down, up and down. Ashima looks at Ashok, who is double-checking to make sure their passports and green cards are in order. She watches him adjust his watch in anticipation of their arrival, and the pale silver hands scissoring into place. "I don't want to go," she says, turning toward the dark oval window. "I don't want to see them. I can't." Ashok puts his hand over hers as the plane begins to gather speed, and then Boston tilts away, and they ascend effortlessly over a blackened Atlantic. The wheels retract and the cabin shakes as they struggle upward through the first layer of clouds. Though Gogol's ears have been stuffed with cotton, he screams nevertheless in the arms of his grieving mother as they climb farther still, as he flies for the first time in his life across the world.